Was about a decade-long process for me. Like you mentioned, I grew up politically, socially in the Israeli political left, the Labor Party, what was known in the 80s and 90s as the peace camp. And people forget, but at the time, it had a very compelling idea that repeatedly won elections. And the idea was that Israel can make peace, that Israel has a path to peace. And it's actually quite simple. All that Israel has to do was give land that is acquired as a result of the victory in the Six-Day War, and this will bring peace. And it was a compelling idea because it seemed to work. It was the basis with the peace for Egypt, which we can now review, but it seemed to be a very successful idea. It definitely governed the negotiations of the 90s. And I basically believed that, especially not just with the Arab world, but especially with the Palestine Arabs, if we just give them a state in the West Bank and Gaza and Israel's military presence, the occupation, capital in East Jerusalem, no settlements, we will have peace. And I voted for every Israeli prime minister that said they're going to make it happen, from Rabin to Peres to Barak to Olmert. And especially with Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert, I watch as they propose to two different Palestinian leaders, Arafat and Abu Mazen, in 2000 and 2008, a fully sovereign Arab state of Palestine, no settlements, no occupation, capital in East Jerusalem, including holy sites. All the things that we were told are what is necessary to make peace. And I watch as two different Palestinian leaders walk away from that, follow it up with a campaign of murderous violence, and most important, are never criticized for that. But basically, you do not find throughout all these processes a single Palestinian voice, even living in London or in the University of Columbia, who would write a piece, an op-ed that says, are you crazy? We can have a state. Go back to the negotiating room. Get it for us. I support the disengagement from Gaza. Like many Israelis, I'm like, you know what? Fine. If they're not going to sign an agreement, we won't be held hostage to their rejectionism. We'll just get out to the last square inch so that they can finally build something. And, like over the years, when people tell me, oh, Einat, you've really changed your views or your opinions. And I'm like, you know what? What I just described is not an opinion. It's not a view. I have opinions. That doesn't happen to be one of them. I tell them, think of it more like a scientific empirical process. We had a hypothesis. The hypothesis was, what stands between us and peace is another Arab state in the West Bank and Gaza, a Palestinian Arab state. Okay, there were a lot of reasons to think why this hypothesis is true. The 90s, the land for peace, all that. Now comes the part that people like to ignore or even erase. The hypothesis was tested.
Yes.
Multiple times.
In different ways. In different ways.
Different leaders, unilaterally.
That's right.
And it collapsed.
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, you're a good scientist. You say, okay, the hypothesis I started with doesn't meet the empirical data. So what alternative hypothesis meets the data? And here I always present the quote by Ernst Bevin, the British foreign minister after World War II. As you know, no friend to the Jewish people. When he needs to explain why Britain failed, Britain betrayed the mandate that it received unanimously from the League of Nations. It did not betray the mandate to the Arabs. Jordan becomes independent, Iraq becomes independent, Syria and Lebanon. But the Jews don't have independence, don't have their state. So he needs to explain the British failure. And he says the following: His Majesty's government is thus faced with an irreconcilable conflict. Now, this is February 47. There are no settlements. There's no occupation. There's no Bibi, right?
That's
there's
right.
No Ben-Gvir, there's no smoke
No
trade.
big bad wolves.
Exactly. no one is displaced also, because if people say, well, the conflict is because Zionism displaced Arabs.
Yeah.
Like in February 47, everyone is in place, no one displaced. So you have no excuses. That's what's so great. There are no excuses, and he calls the conflict irreconcilable. And he goes on to explain. He says, in the land, there are Jews and Arabs. No one, of course, is called a Palestinian. And he says, for the Jews, the top priority is to establish Jewish sovereignty, to have a state. And he says, for the Arabs, and these are the Palestine Arabs, the one that will later call themselves Palestinians, he says, for them, the top priority is to resist to the last, right? That word resistance, the establishment of Jewish sovereignty in any part of the land.
That's
The
right.
conflict is irreconcilable because the Jews want a state and the Arabs want the Jews not
Not
to have a state.
exactly.
Now, this hypothesis meets all the data. So for me, it was more of a decade-long process, really that kind of scientific thinking of saying, okay, I had one belief, it doesn't seem to meet the experience, the data. I began to research, to learn, to meet with Palestinians who basically tell me from the river to the sea. And I realized, okay, the hypothesis that meets all the data is that this is a conflict between the Jews wanting a state and the Arabs wanting the Jews not to have a state.